One. Okay. Welcome to the next session. Now we are going to have presentation by students. We give 30 minutes to each presentation, and we'll request each student to spend no more than 20 minutes to allow 10 minutes of questions, guidance, comments. And the first presenter between now and lunch is a joyous person by the name of Joy. Without further introductions, may I request Joy to start?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to go just give you a little bit of a background of where I come from. I used to be an accountant, and I worked in development with USAID, which I thought then was my passion, until I realized that there's much more to development than life. Actually, where he comes from in Tigray is a constant reminder of my Damascus, of how I left development to research on African leadership. When I came to SARChI, I was vulnerable. I actually had no idea, no clue of where to find a university that would graduate me. And this has been a very important part of a home and a place where I have grown personally and academically. And I'd like to thank, before I make my presentation, because it's transformed so much since I started, I'd like to thank the peers, my peers. These peer groups must not go down, because we've had our very, very important part of our growth process happens during the peer reviews. I remember comments from Zelezeck. I remember comments from Lebs. Lebs would even call me to his office. That's how powerful these peer reviews are. And we would sit down and discuss about my project on a one-on-one. And he invested a lot of time in his office being a peer, really, because he was not supervising me, but he was a peer. And that's very important that we acknowledge that. And that's why I could come into Professor Odora Hoppers' office and say, I have transcended. Because this process, what SARChI does, is really give you that opportunity to rise beyond your limitations and see yourself as part of an intervention, an African intervention, a scholarly intervention, because I would have stayed in a little corner and became a prophet. But that was not enough. But I couldn't come out of that shell of just being a prophet without Professor Odora Hoppers being part of that journey and the peers. And Professor Odora Hoppers has helped me very much in the sense that she's never held my hand. She's let me go to make my mistakes, but tell me, detox, the author must not come into SARChI. I want the researcher, the academic Joy to come out of this process. And it's been a very profound experience. And also the guidance of Professor Higgs, putting me in the structure, because I could go tell all sorts of stories and forget. And forget that this is a thesis and think I'm still writing a book. So he keeps me into the structure so that I don't lose trend when I'm writing a thesis. So it's an enjoyable experience, but it can be painful. But the pain is the source of strength. So today I will present what I believe is now turning into an academic story, not an activist story. I'm always teased and I enjoy it. The structure of my dissertation is that there's an introduction, literature review, research design and methodology, and case studies, African leadership legacy case studies, findings and recommendations. But for purposes of today, I will only focus on chapter 4 and 5, because I really want to draw all your strength and get comments that will shape those 2 chapters. I took a high risk and I'm glad that today it's forming shape, of using African leadership case studies. Oh, I didn't bring my Bible, it's in the office. I should have brought my Bible. This book that I used to get the case studies. But basically the overall is that the aim is to transform African leadership, all means African leadership legacies, into African humanism leadership through indigenous cosmologies. The first objective is to transform these African leadership legacies through indigenous cosmologies. The second objective is to transform these leadership legacies through indigenous knowledge systems. That's in chapter 2. The third objective is to analyze African leadership case studies which affirm, negate, or resist the negation of indigenous cosmologies and indigenous knowledge systems. I think the most risky part was using case studies. I'm sure it's obvious to everybody that I'm not a theorist. Therefore, case studies to me, the stories are really a very important part. Storytelling is an important part of me, and I wanted this thesis to reflect that. And what helped me was the theoretical framework of Africology. And I am so proud to have met, through SARChI, the late Professor Nabudere, who is the driver of Africology, because it helped me find my context as a researcher and as a scholar. And this also enabled me to argue effectively that all African stories need to be contextualized, and my thesis is on those stories, this case studies, this chapter 4. These stories resonate very well with I Am Because We Are. And through these stories, I mean, I have this huge book that I went through last year, and I read all of those stories. I know that I didn't need all of those stories in my thesis, but it was part of this transformation this transcendedness that I feel so very positively right now, because I learned about Africa through the stories of our leaders. Whether they were the first engineer in that country, they had a story of humiliation. They had a story that made me sometimes feel like crying. The pain, I went through the whole continent, learning through the stories of what our leaders had to sacrifice for this transformation that we see in Africa. And also I learned how some of our leaders who sacrificed their lives during the struggle turned around to be monsters. And then I had to sit back and I said, I can't blame the British anymore. I can't blame the French anymore. I had to transcend, because the humiliation that Africa has experienced is all from all sectors, whether it's in religious organization. And that's why it resonated with me very well in Stellenbosch when Evelyn presented the astronauts, the bird eye view of African leadership, because I went through this journey the whole of last year, understanding what happened in DRC, what happened in Angola, through the stories of these leaders. And I think for me, these stories made me realize that one of the reasons why I was hesitant about being part of an academic scholarship is that every institution I went to, they seemed to emphasize, I think, therefore I am, which I think had a conflict with me and my African humanism that I am trying to bring forth. And my methodologies is, of course, this word that I always have to think very deeply before I hermeneutics. Oh, I never get it right. You can say it for me, Prof. Yes. Case studies and critical discourse analysis. With the intervention of the engagement we have with Professor Higgs, I have finally got a structure for the chapter 4. How I will present these case studies is that I'll have 3 broad categories of case studies: one that affirm indigenous cosmology, and those that negate indigenous cosmology, and those that resisted the negation of indigenous cosmologies. But the fundamental of what I found in chapter 3 is the indigenous cosmology will be the pillars of all of those subtopics. The indigenous cosmologies that I got out of chapter 2 in my literature review were the 4: divine guidance or supreme being, cosmic and social order, harmonious human existence, and coexistence. Those were the 4 that I found as transformative points for this transformation that I am trying to unpack in these African leadership legacies. So when I look at, for instance, the case of Mandela, he came out very strongly in my analysis of having resisted the negation of the indigenous cosmology as he was leading during the apartheid regime. And when I look at Agostinho Neto of Angola, I find he was also resisting the negation of the Portuguese. Ziphora Moichela negating the resistance of the Portuguese. And I find Seretse Khama in Botswana, who is very affirmative to the indigenous cosmology. King Sobhuza in Swaziland was affirmative to the indigenous cosmology. Even though there may be witnesses within the public discourse, some minor things. And those who negated the Rhodesian leaders were very much on the negation of these indigenous cosmologies. The Afrikaner regime was much on the negation of the indigenous cosmology. And this is why I found it fascinating when I read that part about Professor, about how we have to rewrite history. But this, I think, is part of that. And until it's finished, it's a very important part of rewriting our history. And let's see our leaders as either affirming, negating, or resisting the negation of indigenous cosmology. This is what that chapter is about. And of course, there'll be a conclusion to that. Then the final chapter will be findings and recommendations, where I now attempt to address the research question. Are indigenous cosmologies and their knowledge systems relevant tools, which is the 5 that I've talked about, for transforming African leadership, all is African leadership legacies, into African humanism leadership legacies? And this chapter will also address the research objective 4, which is to generate African humanism leadership theory based on indigenous cosmologies. What I envisage that I will do and attempt to do in this chapter is really critically analyze the leader-follower relationship. That's what this African humanism leadership for me, because those cosmologies must be affirmed. If someone says they are guided by divine, the leadership must translate in some cosmic and social order. There must be harmonious human existence. There must be coexistence within that environment in which the leader. So the relationship between the leader and the followers must translate in those in that cosmic and social order. And that's what in essence I will be looking at. And I will use the literature chapter, because in the literature review chapter I mapped 4 components, 4 areas, 4 people in Africa that are an important part of my gathering of the indigenous cosmologies and their knowledge systems. And that is Egypt, the Akan in Ghana, the Ethiopia, and the Bantu in Southern Africa. So I use those components of what was what I got in that literature as having to map this leader-follower relationship. But if I'm going to even try and attempt to think about African humanism leadership theory, then obviously I have to take it outside these cosmologies to discourse that I think is currently happening. And therefore, when I unpack it, I will look at 3 areas, 3 broad areas as being part of the pillars, So in actual fact, in the middle is the leaders and the followers. On the whichever side of, if you look at it in as a pyramid, in the middle is the leaders and the followers. On one side is human agency, and the other side is human solidarity and also dignity, which is really centered about the coexistence and celebrating our unity in diversity, and a conclusion to that. I still have 5 minutes. I think I am going to conclude with the last slide. Asking for your critics. I intend to complete for the first comments by end of June. And this dissertation really resonates with I am an African because we are Africa. And it's created a base for me to consider my PhD, which is Africa transcending from humiliation into dignity towards peace and human development. Africa is really a prophetic continent, and I am happy to be part of SARChI because I think SARChI is part of that prophecy. And when we say, Evelyn, Africa is a prophetic continent, which means the victim must now define and redefine what the world should learn from us. And this space that SARChI, that Professor Odora Hoppers wrote about in 2000, and it was published in 2002, is really the prophetic space that people who want to engage their victim state and come out as victorious, not victorious because they have positions in government, but victorious because they have created knowledge. Because in my understanding, knowledge is the ultimate healer, and we need to heal Africa before it teaches the world through this knowledge, and its own knowledge must become part of this model of healing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy, for keep presenting within the 20 minutes, and I hope you have set a good standard. We're going to open up questions, comments, advice in the next 10 minutes.
Do we have to go there and ask the questions again? Yes.
Oh, I forgot my pen over there.
Where?
The yeah, so that I write the comments.
No. Sit there. My question to you, Joy, is to ask you to explain to us the meaning of all. You have written it in capital letters in your research questions, and the word all. Do you mean all the leaders? For example, in Uganda, they have we have had almost 10 presidents, and in Kenya and in Tanzania. And you mean all? What do you mean?
Okay, no, Prof, I know that volume is very important to you. All I was supposed to put dot is ALL. I just needed to summarize it for African leadership legacies, not all of Africa. and because I know this was the first scary moment, she's always scared about. and it is specifically leaders in Egypt, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Bantu.
All the leaders in Egypt.
No. All is an acronym, Prof. All it's an acronym.
Right, come forward, and you face the.
Yeah.
Thank you. My question is, for example, Ethiopia is one of your samples. As Prof said, we had Menelik, we had Haile Selassie, we had Johannes, we had Meles. But for example, Prime Minister Meles was a leader. Haile Selassie was also a leader. they are diametrically opposite
Sure.
leaders. So how are you going to select your sample? Meaning you cannot study all leaders. You will talk about Haile Selassie most probably, and you are going to generalize about Ethiopian leaders. But we had Meles in recent years. He was an Ethiopian leader. So how will it be possible for you to make generalizations about such leaders? Thank you.
Okay, can I respond to that? Okay, the generalization is not about Ethiopian leaders. It's about whether that leader at that time, through his story, because it's about his story, did negate indigenous cosmologies, did affirm indigenous cosmologies. For instance, the two you have mentioned are obviously in my thesis. Menelik, Haile Selassie. And there were other interesting leaders that, for instance, the two brothers who caused the coup of the downfall, who started the fire, the uprising. Yes, those were very interesting because they were resisting the negation of the indigenous cosmologies. So those were that's the trend of thought I was using.
You have not answered my question.
Okay.
Look, when you said Egypt and Ethiopia and so on and so forth, you must select maybe one leader or two leaders in these countries.
Yes.
Otherwise, you will to select leaders and not to because you have to distinguish them somehow. But the account people, for example, have not been stagnant.
Yes.
They have had so many leaders.
Sure.
Who are you going to talk about? I mean, substantively.
Sure. Okay.
Because even if you have reduced your sample
Yes.
to 4 in Africa, Akan, Ethiopia, and what?
Egypt and Bantu.
Uh-huh.
In SADC,
Now,
Southern Africa.
Bantu. What do you mean?
Yes.
Bantu. Hello.
Yes.
Bantu traverses many regions of Africa. What do you mean?
When I said Bantu, I qualified it to, I restricted it to Southern Africa in my write-up. And the reason why I wanted the Southern African perspective is that it is a very, other than the fact that I come from Southern Africa, it was of interest for me to look at the leaders, the liberation leaders within those regions, because those regions were the last to get independence towards the end of that era. Because most of the leaders that I've drawn from are not current leaders. I prefer to work with dead people. Because it's safer. and Prof, I was looking for humanism, and humanism is something that I can easily trace, and this cosmologies I can easily trace in the 18 and the 1900 epochs. But right now, I don't know whether I'd be able to do a good job. But I take your substantive analysis. I take that as a comment.
I think,
And yes. Yes. Okay.
Further from there to that.
At this point, she's got a structure which helps her to do that. And the
Yes.
solving comes the next step.
Exactly.
Yes.
You have not reached it yet.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Any comments, question?
No, my comment was around something, but
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Right, if there's no question or comment, another round of applause for Joy.
Thank you.
Right, we now welcome Morongwa
Nguruma, you sit.
to the chair. And Morongwa, you... sorry, wait.
Oops.
Yeah, take.
I always
Morongwa,
forget.
can you put the microphone properly? It must face upward. The microphone.
It's this one. I will start with the presentation.
Right, again, we will give Morongwa 20 minutes to present and we'll have 10 minutes.
Do you have a watch or something?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's fine.
20 minutes to
Yeah,
present. I think
really
I'll take
fine.
less. I need more time. Thank you, colleagues. I think I'm going to present for less than 20 minutes, maybe, and because there's something here that I would like the House to support me in. My project is about the integration of IKS and modern science. These are two knowledge systems that have developed such a relationship that it's like they are not studying the same things. Like from a phenomenological point of view, it's like they are studying different things. You could swear that one is from Mars and the other one is from another planet. I'm showing you quickly. I'll take you quickly through my chapters. I've already done most of what is here. I just need to finalize the finer details. My chapter 1 is talks about my personal reflections as somebody who grew up in apartheid South Africa and my attitudes on education. It also talks about the South African transformation experience from apartheid to where we are and how it impacted on education. My personal reflections are mainly on my own view of the world, being an African in South Africa during those times. And I have tried to transcend the painful memories. I could never talk about apartheid without crying. And I remember in one meeting, I wasn't here, but Professor Hoppers picked it up from us, and she actually said South African students are still in that pain. Rutendo captured it in the minutes, and when I read the minutes, I cried again. But I've gone through that now. But I do capture the most important parts about my growing up under South Africa, the kind of knowledge that people have, not the system as such, but the knowledge that people had and how they lived using that knowledge. Some of them were illiterate, and how they functioned under their own IKS knowledge, and how the IKS knowledge was replaced by modernization in a place where I lived, not from literature. Chapter 2 talks about knowledge. I realized earlier when I was talking about the confines of my own knowledge, and then which are the confines that were making it difficult for me to integrate IKS and modern science, where even in my own opinion, modern science was advanced, it was useful, it made sense, and my own knowledge, IKS, had no place, and I had accepted that. So talking about knowledge in general takes us to a point where we start defining knowledge. What is knowledge? And then we go through the power relations that knowledge have on people, on every other aspect, and how people conceptualize knowledge in ways that benefit them, and sometimes in ways, and all the time in ways that disempower other people. And this is how our curriculum is structured, because despite all the knowledge that we have, despite all the thousands of students that graduate high school, they cannot use that knowledge. So what is it about the knowledge that they have that is making them not to apply it. Is the omissions in the knowledge. But I talk about it in chapter 2, using standpoint theories and some of the comments from South Africans. My main source here is Professor Hoppers and Professor Pitt. I'm very grateful for having spent some time with Professor Pitt in Italy, where I lived in this tiny village. And I was horrified actually to find that people there actually are just like Africans, in the small village. And in fact, there was this guy who had worked for a very big fashion industry, who left all the glamorous life to come and do organic farming, in Italy. And but the discussions with Professor Pitt were very important, because a lot of the things that I thought I was informing him about, he didn't tell me. But later, when I read his books, I realized that he had actually said that before, 10 years ago, etc., which was very humbling when I was already here. Because we talked about indigenous knowledge and the development of science and the limits of science with Professor Pitt, who actually has a lot of respect for indigenous knowledge systems, which he spent time with the first people of America, studying their ways of doing, and he has a lot of respect from their understanding of cosmology, their understanding of the interrelationship between the universe and the environment. And then chapter 3 is my framework, which is Africology, and I'm very grateful to Professor Hicks for introducing this concept to me, because I was running everywhere. So it was like all in one for me. It had very important insights about what I wanted to express, and I couldn't with my limited education. And then here I talk about knowledge production and the marginalization of IKS. I also talk about taxonomies, about how the knowledge is organized but in ways that are not beneficial, and taxonomies in cultures are usually organized in ways that help. So it goes back again to knowledge production. The research design, I will take you through it quickly. This is the part that I'd like you to help me with. And then chapter 5 is about the integration of modern science and IKS and my conclusions. The work that I've done so far has really been inspired by SARChI. It has given me the courage to break through the ceiling, to just dream about how knowledge can actually be organized. Being a science person and truly believing in science, I was also exposed to the limits and actually the weaknesses inherent in the methodologies of science. And we do see the results of science, but actually sometimes some technologies were done even before the birth of science. So there's a very gray area. The science helps in a lot of ways in explaining things. It can maximize efficiency, but actually science is not technology. There are people who are technologists who are inventing, even if they don't understand science. In Africa, there are people who had these very beautiful gold masks that have been stolen during colonization, and they were not scientists. They were people who knew where to source gold, who knew how to work with it, who knew how to end up making such ornaments that exist. But if you were to send your child now to learn how to work with gold, they'll be first expected to study maths and science, go to some metallurgy course, etc., etc. But people were building, they were constructing buildings, they were building ships without the mention of science. It was knowledge. It was the way their knowledge was organized. And there were great inventions that came from those eras before the name science even made it to the surface. I've been inspired by SARChI to actually dream, to move beyond the post-colonial theorizations, to shed what was entrapping me, and to redefine education, to redefine knowledge, and to be bold enough to present a model that I've never seen anywhere, that I really think I have the right to present. And this is where I would like you to help me with. Although this is about transformation of the university, I have a section here where I'm talking about universities as producers of knowledge, and therefore the knowledge that we have was produced by universities. And I also talk about the conditions under which universities produce knowledge in South Africa in particular. The knowledge that we had, which was theorized for colonial expansion and other things, was inherited by us, and the universities in South Africa in particular tweaked it to suit the Afrikaner survival. That is the knowledge that we have, and this is the knowledge that we are perpetuating as people in education. So we need to deconstruct, we need to actually go back to what I call first principles, sit down now and discuss what education is, which has not happened so far. We are still carrying on with the knowledge left to us by the nuts. The robust exposition of constitutive rules, I think I've done that sufficiently to present an epistemology of hope. For me, the hope that we are presenting with the education of science is for empowering people to solve their problems. I mean, what's the point of knowing all those Marx theories and all those long equations when they are not helping you in any way? Between birth and death, there's life, and people need to eat, people need to interact with the environment, people get sick, and those are very important aspects that people need to learn about. And then the driving concepts, I've tried by all means to integrate them. I don't want to waste more of my time. I can talk about them at lunch. Now, the research problem, I've gone at length, written about science education and reality, and also about the IKS policy that doesn't seem to be from literature, from people who've done research on the IKS policy. Everybody ends up saying there's a lack of guidance. It's like people really do not know. And I understand where these people who are being researched on come from, because they are also like me, trapped in chemistry, physics, and trying to say, but what was the name for intermolecular force in IKS? No, they didn't know, you know. So by staying in those compartments, we are actually demeaning, we are negating IKS again. We are going back, we'll always go back to a point where we say, they knew no better. They did not know that they are interatomic orbitals. They did not know about the SB, you know, those things. So we cannot use IKS in the current compartmentalization and structuring of the curriculum. My research question, what knowledge are we using as a country? I'm sure I've already answered that one, but I have answered it again in my analysis. How is the education system dealing with the two knowledge systems? It's part of my analysis. How is IKS as a mega policy system covering all sectors in the government, influencing education in particular? I'm battling a little bit with this one, but I'm trying with transdisciplinarity in my analysis. And then I have designed a model that I hope you won't laugh when you see it, because I'm very proud of the model I've designed. The overall aim is to provide the tension between modern science and IKS generally, and I have done that. I've done that by showing, you know, the history of modern science, how it's been distilled, you know, by people like Bacon and by people like, you know, right from Galileo when he started with the mathematization of nature, when he wanted everything that was nature to be presented mathematically. And then the distillation continued with Bacon, with the domination, you know, the respect for nature was off, the metaphysics was off, and then the separation of mind and matter by Descartes, it continued like that. And then it is where it's almost unrecognizable to where it comes from. And IKS has to a large extent maintained what I would rather say a frame of reference, what nature is, because of their relationship with nature. And then, okay, my theoretical framework, as I say, is Africology. I've talked about the deconstruction, which we need as South Africans, the transdisciplinarity aspect, because if you're going to study, we people who've studied science know how to create molecules, know the reactions, but we don't know how they affect everything else. We don't even understand how we fit in the economies of country. We are just ignorant people who know nature the way it was not meant to be. It's useful though, but you cannot do it alone. You've got to do it with the other connections about nature. And then epistemology is very important, and I think Professor Nabudere was very strong on epistemology, because what we have accepted as knowledge is what was given to us, while it had nothing to do with making our lives easier. In fact, it might have had a lot to do with bringing us into slavery, but we have embraced it, and that is our knowledge. So for the first time, we might be able to sit down now and say, okay, what is knowledge? What is education? And how would you like your kids to be educated as? My methodology is qualitative, and I'm using these methods. And the analysis, I've played around with a lot of analytic methods, and I've settled on thematic analysis and using critical theory. And then my themes for the analysis, what has come out from my data that I'm busy working on now, I'm hoping I'll finish tomorrow, is the holistic nature of IKS. These are the themes that came up from my data. The structural violence I wanted to say modern science. Okay, it's actually the structural violence in modern science as it applies to food, pesticides, and how the environment is being poisoned, how people are being poisoned, and then how everybody is actually now dependent on somebody else to treat them from the poison that they don't understand that is poison, because how science uses knowledge, the institutionalization of science, the knowledge that science has. Science decides which knowledge to put into public space. Some knowledges are kept. The biggest fraud, I think, or the biggest disappointment about science is its understanding of race, for instance. Everybody talks about race when you refer to black and white, etc. But scientifically, there's nothing like that. You only have the human race. When people are black and others are green or whatever, they are not different races. But it's a word that has gone into every policy, into big establishment. People still refer to people as the black race and the white race, which is wrong scientifically. Scientifically, race is defined as species that share the same characteristics. It's like deciding that a black cat and a white cat belong to different race groups of animals. It's more or less like that. The other theme is the relevance of science education to needs of people, livelihoods, and every need. And the other one is science as gatekeeper to livelihoods. Because science education is so difficult generally because of what we call the scientization of knowledge and also the mathematization of knowledge. Ordinary concepts as you know them, you will not be able to pass the matric exam because we've put them in formulae, we've put them in ways that your language or your experience does not have a place. So in that way, in my analysis, by making it so inaccessible, we are keeping learners as matric dropouts. We are keeping learners from being admitted to universities because they couldn't pass science, and science the way we are presenting it in the curriculum. The model responds. What I've done with my analysis, I've analyzed data on modern science and data on indigenous knowledge systems. I did not analyze the policies. I did not want to analyze the policies because I work for the Department of Education. But another reason was, the aim was not to critique the policies. I like the policies. I think the people who developed the RDP, the white paper, the NCS policy had done their work. So there's nothing for me to complain about it. It is in our application of policies that we messed up. So my model, I'll show you my model. It's in another program. I'll show you how I'm trying to interpret this model, these policies now, and show how they link to the model that I have. In my model, I'm concentrating on 4 quadrants. 5 minutes. The health quadrant. I think basic education must include everything about health. It's not unusual for us not to know where our hearts are or how our bodies work, because the medical world has institutionalized knowledge about health, about physiology. So it's okay for you to go through high school without even knowing what foods are good for you, how your body functions. If you need to know that, you must go and pay the doctor to tell you. So I don't understand why that cannot be part of basic education. The environment and commerce quadrant. The reason why the environment is with commerce is because the RDP and the white paper, and actually the NCS had said that, but it did not happen. The environment, I think, needs to be studied together with the commerce. The commerce, because commercial interests are the only people who destroy the environment. Nobody else. Mining, water and dams, everything. Those are the only people who, for commercial reasons, work with the environment and destroy the environment. So these two must come together. Civic education. Most of our graduates become MPs. They become they draw policies, but we've never prepared them. How do we expect them to run our countries? They've been busy studying the molecule and the Newton's forces, and then suddenly they are thrown into this era where they've got to now to form bilaterals, talk to other countries, and they know nothing really. They are only there maybe because they studied history, culture, arts and language, and I think I had, the other one was history. I think everybody in basic education needs to understand history, the forces that put us where we are, all of us. We also need to understand the history of modern science, how modern science was conceptualized, where it comes from, what was left, what was in, and also the history of IKS. I would like, the way I've done my analysis, I've like split my data into two. Modern science and IKS, I've reserved it for the thematic analysis. And the policies, I've reserved them for a model that I think will need to work. So I need advice on that. And then on my themes on analysis of modern science and IKS, yeah, I think that's all. But I would like to show you my model quickly. Can I have extra? Okay. Okay, this is like I'll quickly run through this model. When I tried to transfer it here, it didn't bring all the features in it. The curriculum, I think, should be centered around the self. It must inform the self, the community, and also the world. And these are my quadrants that I spoke about: the health, the environment, and the civic education, as well as the history. And I want to quickly show you something else. I just want to show you how I plan now to summarize to show how my model is supported by what I have here, which I'm still working on, are the features of the model. This model, I've explained it, telling what the dots means, the lines around it, the wavy lines, all that, about knowledge that is not static. And then here, it's about how the RDP supports my model, the white paper, and the NCS. Those of you who are who have interest in education might be wondering why I'm not talking about CAPS. The reason why I'm not talking about CAPS, which was a new invention, is because NCS is the only policy. CAPS is actually supposed to explain the NCS. So I would rather talk about the NCS rather than the CAPS. That's all. Thank you.
Is it finito? Oh, okay. Right, thank you very much. She wanted advice. She was very clear about what type of advice she needs, but you can also provide comments and also questions. Can we open it up now? Okay. Don't forget, you need to talk in when you give advice or raise question or comment. Who goes first?
I'll have to write them down. I didn't bring.
All right, maybe let me abuse the chair. Okay. You mentioned that you wanted to focus mainly on implementation, and because you are happy with the architecture, the policies. You are worried about how to integrate the knowledge systems at implementation level. And I guess this model you are proposing is at implementation level. So that's correct.
When you say implementation, you are saying this is how you can integrate. Are you saying that?
That's what I'm trying to get clarity.
No, it's how you need to. No, I didn't go up to the nitty-gritties. I'm showing that the only way to integrate IKS and modern science is if you collapse the little subjects, the disciplines, and you start a new conversation now on how knowledge in these areas can be packaged. You start the knowledge with all the people, IKS, because if you from the history of knowledge, from colonialism, the NP, the indigenous people were really never part of those discussions. So from those discussions, the people can start agreeing that these are the 4 quadrants that are important for our lives. So how do we repackage college? The new repackaged knowledge might have new names. It might have new codes. This is not like you take this model and then you go to school. No, we will still need to have a discussion on how to move from this model that I'm proposing.
Okay, so it's the model is repackaging in such a way that that repackaging will promote integration.
Yes.
Okay, because you could learn from a UNESCO project that was trying to do that. Botswana tried to call it integrated science to break the boundaries, and the extent to which that was successful or not.
I've looked at some projects, including the Ugandan one, and in my chapter 5 I actually talk about some of the models. But what I found is that, but maybe I need to look more, what I find is that everybody was still working towards science. You know, it's like, here is science, so we need to try and fit ourselves in. I am saying, perhaps like Dewey and maybe like Frey, that science is okay, it is there. Let's use it as we need it, instead of studying the experiments that people long time ago did. You know, just because I flipped a coin like this, does it mean everybody must flip a coin, even if they don't want to? Science is an important aspect of learning, but why should we learn it and not use it?
Right, colleagues, others, questions, comments, advice?
Say something.
Are you satisfied, or are you afraid? Are you excluded from the conference?
What one? Which one? Do you want the slide?
Yeah, where you, yes.
I was explaining how I broke down my method, my analysis, where in one chapter I have everything about modern science, about knowledge, modern science, and IKS, and policies of science education. Now, when I did my analysis, I did not include the policies in the analysis. I kept them for that little table. I don't know if if you can do this. So that's what I wanted to ask you, because the data that I analyzed was on knowledge, modern science, IKS. I did not analyze the policies of the department where I'm working. I simply used them, like I cut them out of the data and used them in that table to show to show my interpretation of the policies. So I don't know if you can do that.
No. Sir Joy, you were not recorded.
I mean, from my side, the reflection, the thinking I was having was just around which data exactly were you analyzing?
Modern science, IKS, and knowledge.
From which source?
Documents, literature.
Policies about
no, literature. It was literature.
Secondary sources.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just wanted to understand that because it wasn't coming very clear.
Oh yeah, I need to write that. And then I've only used the policies to inform my model. I haven't analyzed them. I haven't critiqued them. I want to take them as they are, because when I read these policies and the literature that I'm reading, it's like the people who designed these policies had actually read what I was reading. Yes.
My comment is, what if you analyze the policies also? If they to analyze does not necessarily mean that criticize it negatively. So it will make it more complete if you start with the policies and then discuss all the details. If there is no, if they are well done, it will be good if it is part of your
my data analysis.
because you are saying that the policy is good. It means that you have made analysis.
Well,
You cannot say that it is good without analyzing it. So I think it will be good
table later. Kinfe. Analyze them with the data and also use them separately. Yes. I was avoiding saying that. I was avoiding saying the problem is with the implementation. I'm pretending like this has not been implemented because I work there and my daughter is only starting university next year. So I was just saying these are the policies and this is my idea. I didn't really want to go into how wrong we are in implementing the policies.
Yes, Prof.
I was struck by the part about the collective moral vision, where it said that either there hasn't been much collective moral vision or there have been a lot, but now we have a collective moral vision, and the collective moral vision now is equal dignity. And I think that means equal dignity for IKS.
Yes.
And if it means that, then something that Lebs mentioned, I think, becomes crucial, and that's meta capacity building. Because if you don't have meta capacity building, you can never implement your moral vision.
Is it who? Next? We've got 1
Prof.
minute for the last one. No one. Okay. You do have. Did you get guidance?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll still go back to people though.
Yes. Yes. Oh yeah. Sorry. Can you please give her another round of applause? Right. So we've got the next one. In that order. Is it in that order? Oh, it's lunchtime. Oh, okay. She's going to check first. You do have an opportunity if you wanted to say something. Last word to Morongwa while she's checking for lunch. Anyone, the last word for Morongwa? Or Morongwa, you've got too much now. You.
No, I
Okay.
think I'll still. These are the final stages where you're doing the icing. So I think I'll need to talk
Okay.
to more people,
More
maybe
people,
via
yes.
email or
Yes,
otherwise.
yes. All right. So Morongwa will circulate. Be ready to provide assistance through the email or telephone. And now it's that important item on the agenda, the most important item on the agenda, which is the site. So we don't. How many minutes? How long does it take you for you to fill this? No. 30 minutes. All right. Can we come back at 1:15? Is it possible? Okay. Thank